Welcome to Classic Take, Season 2, Episode 32. The topic which we'll discuss today is will Moshiach be a charming peacemaker or will he be a vengeful warrior? When we look at the prophecies discussing Moshiach, we will find what might appear at the surface as very different prophecies regarding Moshiach. Let's start with one prophecy we have in the beginning of the book of Yeshayahu, towards the beginning. It speaks about how when Mashiach will come, Mashiach will rebuild the third temple. It says that the third temple will be erected upon, the house of Hashem will be on the Temple Mount, and all the nations will be flocking to Mashiach. V'noru elav, they'll be flocking to him, and Mashiach will teach them how to live peacefully with each other. La'isa goyal goy. Cherev, no nation will anymore lift a sword to another nation. They will beat their plows, their chitzur charvoisim leitam. They'll beat their swords into plowshares. And it speaks about how Mashiach will be this leader that everybody will be attracted to. Everybody will be, drawn to him to hear his teaching, and they'll accept his counsel. They'll accept his and absorb his teachings, and this he won't have to fight with anybody, he won't have to overcome anybody. They'll be coming to him, and they'll eagerly listen and appreciate his teaching, and it will affect them. They won't be fighting with each other. They'll live in peace with harmony, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, we find other verses which speaks of Mashiach as waging wars, as without any limitations. He will conquer his enemies. He will overcome them, and so on and so forth. So, at a superficial glance, the question arises: is what is the personality of Mashiach? Will he be a vengeful warrior? Will he be a very kind and peace-loving person? He will be a very charming person. He won't be fighting with anybody. People will just be drawn to him. And if we go a little bit deeper, we could see these differences already apparent in the ancestors of Mashiach. Mashiach will be a descendant of David HaMelech, of King David, and of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, the son of David HaMelech. Now, although they were father and son, and Shlomo continued the dynasty of his father, but they were very, very different. David HaMelech was somebody who waged war most of his life. So much so that when he wanted to build a temple, he was told by the prophet that Hashem told him that you will not merit to build the holy temple. You will not merit to build the Beis HaMikdash. He says you will have a son. His name will be Shlomo. Shlomo means Shalom Yeh B'yamav. There will be peace in his day. He will be the one to merit building the temple. David HaMelech was told, Dam l'Rev Shefachti, you spilled a lot of blood. You were very vengeful. You fought many wars, which was required of him, which was the mission he had from Hashem to do at the time. But nevertheless, it wasn't considered a completely perfect thing to do. And therefore, because of all the blood that he spilled, it's not appropriate that he should build a temple, which is a house of peace, a house of where divine godliness is revealed in a peaceful and harmonious manner. In the days of Shlomo, on the other hand, Shlomo was exactly the opposite of David HaMelech, in the sense that David had to fight many battles. Shlomo HaMelech didn't fight any battles. On the contrary, all the nations were drawn to him. He was so wise and smart that people came, the Queen of Sheva and other kings and queens, they came from afar to hear his wisdom. They were drawn to him, they respected him. And he was a man of peace, and that is why he was the one who built the holy temple. So Mashiach will be a descendant from King David, but he will descend, King David had a number of sons, a number of children, but notably Mashiach will come from Shlomo. He will be a descendant of Shlomo HaMelech. According to the Rambam, in his commentary on the Mishnah and other sources, Mashiach has to be a descendant not only of David HaMelech, but specifically from Shlomo. So which means if he's a descendant of both, so obviously on the one hand he will inherit the characteristic of Shlomo, which is to be peaceful, wise, and everybody will be coming to him to hear his wisdom. At the same time, he's still a descendant of David HaMelech, and in a certain sense, some of the characteristics, some of the narratives of Mashiach seem to compare much more to David HaMelech, to a warrior that is fighting for the rights of the Jewish people. He's fighting the enemies of the Jewish people. Very similar to what David HaMelech did in his day. So there are two ways of explaining this, of understanding this. But first of all, it's important to understand that when Mashiach arrives at the scene, there are two ways his arrival could be. His arrival could either be in a very peaceful, harmonious way, or his arrival can be in a way where there's wars and there's fights. And the reason for that is simple. If the world is ready for Mashiach, so then the world will embrace Mashiach with open arms. Our sages speak about the gathering of the exiles, how the nations of the world themselves will help, and they themselves will collect the Jewish people living within their countries and bring them to Mashiach. Mashiach won't have to fight with them. On the contrary, they'll be ready for him. They'll embrace him with open arms. On the other hand, if the world is not ready for Mashiach, and Mashiach arrives on the scene, Mashiach will have to, so to say, do some dirty work. He's going to have to eliminate some negative elements from the world. He'll have to fight for the rights of the Jewish people. He'll have to wage wars. There's multiple ways he could wage the wars, whether it's simple in the physical battles or spiritual battles, as we've discussed in another episode. But he will have to deal with negative elements. So, in a certain sense, it depends also within the Jewish people themselves. If the Jewish people are meritorious, they're ready for the coming of Mashiach, so then Mashiach won't have to superimpose himself on them. The Rambam speaks in the laws of Mulachim. The Rambam says, and then of his Mishnah Torah discusses how Mashiach will compel the Jewish people to fulfill the Torah mitzvahs. Mashiach will have to compel them, meaning that they're not yet ready to do it on their own. On the other hand, in other places, the Rambam speaks about the fact that the Jewish people, before Mashiach comes, will already be on the path of righteousness, of making themselves better. If they're in such a mindset, obviously Mashiach doesn't have to force them to do good. They'll be doing good on their own. So when Mashiach affects the Jewish people also, it really depends on their spiritual state. Are they meritorious? Are they ready for Mashiach? And Mashiach is just going to walk right in and teach them, and they won't, he won't have to compel them, or they're not going to be yet ready for Mashiach. So Mashiach could come in different ways, depending on the situation of the people, of the Jewish people, of the world at large, and based on that, that's how his arrival will happen. However, even if Mashiach comes in a way that there's wars that have to be fought, and there's Jewish people that have to be compelled to do the right thing, as our sages explain that ultimately, Mashiach will be a charming peacemaker. Because the stage of being a vengeful warrior, the stage of compelling people to do what's right, is only a preparatory stage. It's not the final, ultimate goal of Mashiach. And this idea is actually reflected in a verse that we say in our daily prayers. We say, we say that saviors will go up Mount Sion, lishbay, to judge the mountain of Esav. And God will become, kingdom will be to Hashem, God will become king over the world. Now, if we look at the verse, what does it mean that saviors will go up on the mountain of Sion to judge the mountain of Esav? The saviors here refer to Mashiach, Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. We discussed in the previous episodes the two Mashiachs. But saviors will go, Mashiach will go to judge the mountain of Esav. What does it mean to judge the mountain of Esav? The mountain of Esav refers, usually it's interpreted to refer to Rome or to other nations that are subjugating the Jewish people. And Mashiach will judge them. Judgment here doesn't just mean, having a court case, but judge means to execute judgment over them, to punish them, to make sure that they don't hurt the Jews anymore. So there will be a aspect of lishbay dasaresa. The prophecies predict that there will be an aspect of Mashiach which he will, fight for the rights of the Jewish people, and he will judge. He will execute judgment upon those people who are not dealing good with the Jews or have harassed the Jews in the past. However, the pasuk ends with the words "V'hoysal Hashem hamelucha." Kingdom will be to Hashem. Now, the term melucha, kingdom, we know in Hebrew there are two different words that describe rulership and kingdom. One is called melucha, and one is called memshala. One is kingdom, and one is rulership. Memshala is rulership. What is the fundamental difference between the two of them? Rulership means when somebody is ruling over somebody else against their desire. What you might call in simple English dictatorship or other forms of kingdom, of a monarchy, where people are not too happy about the one that's sitting in the palace, the one that's running the country. On the other hand, Melucha, kingdom, represents a higher, a more refined, a more proper and much better approach of kingdom, which is that the people themselves, the subjects of the kingdom, they want the king to be their king. That's a much better and higher and proper way of kingdom. The king, the ruler is not dictating his rule to the people. He's not forcing them to comply with him, but they want him to be their king. So when the pasuk says, when the verse continues, Vaisal Hashem HaMelucha, means that the Har Esav, the Mount of Esav, will eventually accept Hashem as king over them, which doesn't say that Hashem will have rulership. The verse says Hashem will have kingdom. He will become king. They will accept him willingly. So what that means is, as the Rebbe explains, as it emerges from a number of sources, that in the beginning, yes, there will be, very possibly, there will be an element of judgment, you might even call it revenge. It says that Moshiach will take Hashem, or Moshiach will avenge the blood spilled of the Jewish people. That those nations that hurt the Jewish people will have to, pay retribution, that they'll be punished for it. But this is not the main purpose of Moshiach. Moshiach is not out there to fight wars, to take vengeance. Ultimately, Moshiach is there to reveal God's kingdom, to teach people. So ultimately, one stage is Moshiach will appear on the scene. It could be that not everybody, at least in the world, is going to be so excited from the fact that he's there. And Moshiach might have to superimpose himself. But what the trick of Moshiach will be is that eventually people will come to realize that this is the truth. People will come to realize that this is not a dictator. This is not somebody that's just forcing me to comply with him, but they'll be compelled in a very internal way, not to be forced, but they'll be intellectually compelled. They'll realize this is the truth. So first there'll be a stage of lishpait, of judgment, of fighting, of forcing what's right and what's wrong to be seen as right and wrong, and Mashiach will make sure that right and wrong is clearly visible, and what's wrong has to be eliminated, and what's right has to be done. But ultimately, this will lead to a deeper stage of Ahaisal Hashem HaMelucha, where the nations of the world will willingly accept Hashem's judgment over them. With this also, the Rebbe explains that the Rambam, when we look closely at the Rambam describing the activities of Mashiach, the Rambam definitely discusses Mashiach as waging wars. He will be victorious. He will wage the wars of Hashem, and he'll be victorious over the enemies of the Jewish people. At the same time, however, the Rambam also says that at the times of Mashiach, the world will be fixed. The world will be fixed to serve Hashem as one, as it says, Oz epoch. The Rambam brings a verse where the verse says that then I will transform all the nations, that they will all call out in the name of Hashem and serve Him as one. Now, if you look closely at the verse says, Oz epoch, I will transform. Transform is not compelling. Compelling means you force. When you force a person, you're not transforming him. You're just forcing something upon him. However, ultimately, Mashiach will transform the people of the world themselves to realize that this is the truth. And that's also why the Rambam uses the term v'yasaken. If we look at the Exodus of Egypt, which was the other great redemption the Jewish people had, at the Exodus of Egypt, Egypt was broken. Egypt was smashed. There were 10 plagues that smashed the Egyptians. They came to realize against their will, despite their defiance of it, and despite their stubbornness, they were smashed, they were broken. Hashem showed that I am the boss, and Pare was forced to let the Jewish people out. And the purpose, to a certain extent, wasn't just that the Egyptian people should know about Hashem, but there was a primary goal over here to break the ego of the Egyptian people, to make them subdued before Hashem. However, when we're talking about the Exodus of Egypt, the Exodus from his final exile, the Rambam doesn't use the term that the world will be broken. Quite the contrary, the Rambam uses the term l'saken ha'so'ilam kuloi, which means to fix the world, to make it better. Because ultimately, while there might be wars Mashiach will wage, but ultimately The goal will be to transform the world from within, that they themselves should recognize the truth of Hashem's kingdom. As Rambam himself writes, that when the nations of the world will see how the true Mashiach arrives and how he is victorious and successful, they'll realize that this is the truth. This is who the prophets were speaking about, that this is the one on whom the Spirit of God rested, and they will accept him. They will, even though they might have not been expecting him before, but when he'll come, they'll realize this is the truth, and they will accept him wholeheartedly. There's another point, which just on the technical point, as I mentioned before, it says that King David was told that he will not build the holy temple because of the blood that he spilled. The question is, how will Moshiach be able to build the third temple if there was so much blood that he spilled? According to the prophecies that speak about how Moshiach will wage wars and will overcome the enemies of the Jewish people. So seemingly there will be many, it might appear that there's much blood that he will spill. So how will he be able to be the one to build a third temple? So there's multiple answers given. As I mentioned before, one simple answer can be given is that Mashiach, even if Mashiach will wage wars, but the purpose of his wars won't be just to spill blood, but really his ultimate goal will be to make peace. Just there might be certain elements that are originally fighting him, which Mashiach will have to subdue. But furthermore, there's an interesting explanation by the Chassam Sofer. He says that when Mashiach will come, Hashem will arrange that the nations of the world that are against Mashiach, they'll end up fighting each other. They'll destroy each other. Mashiach won't have to be the ones to exact revenge from them. Hashem will arrange that the nations themselves will hurt each other. They will be working on behalf of Hashem to take revenge or to eliminate those forces that hurt the Jewish people, that are trying to to block the coming of Mashiach. So Mashiach himself might not necessarily be a vengeful warrior after all. Hashem will arrange different things in the world where certain nations, certain elements of the world will fight each other, and they will destroy themselves. They will destroy the evil that they contain. Mashiach will enter into the world, and he himself will just introduce positivity, peace, kindness, teaching, and everybody will flock to him to hear his teachings and to be inspired and guided to live their lives according to the plan that Hashem had always wanted the world to be. Let us hope that we'll merit the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days. Amen.